Welcome to Macro Matters, a podcast where global experts offer clear-eyed analysis on global economic policy. I'm your host, Emily Slater, Executive Director of the Bretton Committee. Each episode, I sit down with BWC's diverse network of members, from global policymakers to private sector leaders, to discuss timely topics in economics, geopolitics, and finance. In a media landscape full of noise, these conversations offer clarity. We go beyond the headlines to explore not just what's happening in the global economy, but why it's happening, what it means, and what might come next. Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Macro Matters podcast, and I'm so excited to have our guest with us today, Dr. Joaquim Levy, coming all the way from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We're going to get into all things Brazil today on the podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about Brazil's growth trajectory. We're going to talk about, of course, kind of the global tariff environment and how Brazil's navigating that and kind of a changing geopolitical order. And we're going to talk really about what Brazil's ambitions are on the global stage. So let me quickly introduce Joaquim, who is, of course, a member of the Bretton Committee and on our advisory council, and has been so gracious in leading a lot of our multilateral reform work in the past and also our sovereign debt work. So we appreciate all that he does for BWC. But he's currently the Director for Economic Strategy and Market Relations at Banco Safra in Brazil, former Managing Director and CFO of the World Bank, which of course is where I got to know you, Joaquim, former Finance Minister of Brazil, former President of the Brazilian Development Bank, just a policy and market background. You've really done it all in terms of your experience. So no one better to talk through, where Brazil is in the global economy today. So why don't we start there, Joaquim? Brazil's had a pretty resilient growth story since COVID, really. Maybe a little bit uneven, but pretty resilient and strong growth trajectory. So tell me a little bit about what you see as been the main drivers of kind of Brazil's growth story and where it's going from here, what you see in terms of its outlook as well.
Okay, well, first, thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be at the Bretton Woods Committee place and just at the eve of one more
Yes.
meetings, discussions here in Washington. Well, Brazil, yes, indeed, has grown well since 21. I think that the main driver really of Brazil has been the exports. Both in terms of agriculture, we continue to produce more and with more productivity, more diversity of things, really trying to explore the land, available land, with all the caution about protecting forests and the other biomes, but really investing heavily on that and with technology, we are blessed in Brazil to have the ability to get more than one crop a year and without irrigation. And then sometimes it's almost like three crops because in between crops like soybean, corn, and then you can have the cattle.
Yeah.
So this productivity that what you get from there has been really a major driver of growth. Also because agriculture involves a lot of other things. So if the GDP of agriculture itself is not that big, when you think all the technology, all the factors, the inputs that they need, you talk about 30% of the economy very easily. There are also, of course, production of oil. It's a little bit like the U.S. We've been growing our production of oil. And then there is the combination of two, which is all sorts of biofuels, ranging from ethanol, a lot of biodiesel, also biomethane, and so on. And what is interesting is that we can talk a little bit about that later, is that in many cases we get co-benefits on that. So you get cheaper energy at the same time that you get more food and more jobs and you even save in the distribution of fuel because you get the production of fuel closer to consumption. So it's very interesting because there is a combination, what we would call circular economy, but not at cost, rather getting more efficiency. And this is why I say this is one driver. So these, I would say, are the main drivers. Consumption is doing fine. Has been relatively strong the last couple of years. This year will be quite more sedate because monetary policy has been quite tight in recent years. So what we'd expect? Yeah, we expect to continue to grow around 2.5%. This year might be a little bit less, but on average, 2.5%. And as long as it's sustainable, I think this is really what is needed in Brazil. We'd love to grow 4%, but that would be a little bit more challenging. Growing at 2.5% is also important from the fiscal point of view, because of course you have a huge, say, a social welfare system, and it requires some revenues and some growth to keep up with these. So we're growing well. The driver has been a lot of export, and also even I mean consumption is doing fine. And in the last 2 years, we also got a little bit more of investment, including investment in infrastructure. So I'd say that it's not an extremely dynamic, vigorous economy, but it's, I'd say, broadly balanced. You mentioned monetary policy tightening, and the central bank was one of sort of the first movers, I would say, in kind of addressing inflation. Obviously, post COVID, and a lot of advanced economies and emerging economies were having to really address inflation. U.S. has been a little bit slower to move. What are your expectations for inflation targets in Brazil? Well, we're approaching again the target. The target is 3%, which nowadays is quite an ambitious target, right? Even the U.S. is having trouble to get to 3%, let alone Brazil. But we are in the target. And then last year, for a number of reasons, there was a little bit of, say, discomfort. And we got a huge movement in the currency, depreciation of currency from the second to third quarter. And then, of course, the last few months of the year, the dollar strengthened everywhere, and also it strengthened in Brazil, which meant that you got a huge impulse because of the currency devaluation. The IMF in the last Article 4 has estimated that if you didn't have this run of the currency in the second half of last year, inflation would have been stable at 4%, and now going back approaching 3.5 or 3%. So, okay, bygones are bygones. The monetary policy reacted to that, and some sort of discomfort. There was a change also in the governor of the central bank, so people wanted to be, on the safe side. And then, of course, we also have benefited with the appreciation of the real in the last few months with the weakening of the dollar. This has lowered the price of imports and even the price of domestic food and other things that are priced internationally. So we probably going to get by the end of this year with an inflation of 4.5%, a little beyond, a little below that, and next year probably 3.5%, even with already incorporating some relaxation of the monetary policy by the turn of the year, and they have room for 200, 300 basis points along the year next year. So inflation is slowing down quite substantially in the last few months. You're getting 0.2, 0.3. It has a little bit of a volatility because of airplane tickets and this kind of thing. But when you look at the core inflation, it's really converging in a nice way, including services. which was a concern because unemployment in Brazil, I didn't mention this in the first question, but unemployment in Brazil has been quite low.
Yep.
Job creation has been quite strong the last 3 years. So there was a concern that this would put too much pressure in services.
Yep.
But it has been, I mean, there's work to be done, but it has been pretty much under control.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the Brazil story domestically has been pretty strong. And I guess I want to ask, how do you think that the strength of the Brazilian economy and the sort of export driven growth has positioned it to sort of manage the global tariff environment that we're in now? Obviously, every country is having to and has had to respond to what the U.S. has done in terms of tariffs. So, how do you think the Brazilian economy is positioned to navigate that, and how have the policies kind of responded to this changing environment?
Look, you realize that Brazil is in a very particular situation with
Very
respect
unique.
to the U.S.
Yep.
Because in the case, the U.S. has run a surplus
Yeah.
for the last 10, 15 years. I mean, the trade on goods, and if you include services, the surplus is even bigger because, I mean, Brazil is like the third largest market for a number of Netflix or Google and so on, a huge market, which means that we do pay a lot, and now with an increase in AI and so on,
Yep.
even more. So we started from a situation where actually had a deficit
Yeah.
with the U.S., which in a sense is good because if even if for specific reasons, temporary reasons, this was not totally factoring in the first round, in the Liberation Day, we're in the group of 10%. Then, for very specific reasons, there was an additional 40%. So if you go back to the original situation, which would reflect more the methodology, let's call it adopted in Liberation Day,
Yeah.
we'll be pretty fine.
Yeah.
Okay. What has been the consequence? First, it was pretty uneven. There were a lot of sectors that didn't get the full force of that, particular products that are of great interest of the U.S. Well, oil, for instance, we send a lot of oil to the U.S. to be refined here and exported elsewhere. We had a surplus with oil, although we used to import a lot of diesel and other oil products. But anyway, so this is not covered. You have orange juice, which is also very important fuel for the morning, right? When you wake up. Coffee, for whatever reason, was not included, but I think sooner or later will also be included because there is no alternative for the U.S. to get coffee. And but more generally, what has happened is that, of course, it hurts. But we have managed to redirect most of our exports to other places. And there's a reason for that. A lot of the things that you export to the US are basically, say, commodities. And not only they enter in the productive process in the US. So even, for instance, we export is steel, but a lot of the steel that we export are slabs that then they go to a steel mill in the U.S. and then it becomes a final product.
Yeah.
So which means that actually having the Brazilian thing lowers the price of U.S. products. If you put too much tariffs on the Brazilian thing, the final U.S. steel product will be less competitive vis-a-vis what is imported, right? But anyway, so we believe that most of these things will be exempted or will have a reduced thing. But meanwhile, we've been able to find new markets for most of the things. There are specific things, for instance, some wood products, okay, that are used in construction here in the U.S. That still is a little bit of a problem, has not been solved yet. But so we lost some money, but it's not something that you mean 2-3% of GDP. It's more like 0.2% of GDP,
Yeah.
the impact of that.
Yeah.
And also the Brazilian government is finding ways to support little bit the companies temporarily, like providing liquidity and so on.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is to continue negotiations that are doing fine.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody saw what President Trump mentioned during the UN meetings, and there have been other conversations since that, and there will be others in the future. And now they have the teams, Secretary Rubio talking to our foreign affairs ministers, and there's progress. So this is the first thing. And the second thing, we'll continue to expand the diversification of our trade. Everybody knows that China is a very large partner, but is a very large partner among 100 other partners that you have in international trade in Brazil.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about this kind of multipolar, I guess, global economy and how Brazil is navigating that because President Lula and others have kind of coined the Brazilian foreign policy, I guess, approach as being an active non-alignment, right? So kind of a throwback to the Cold War era, right? Not aligning with any global superpower. So tell me a little bit more about what Brazil's foreign policy approach is and how it's kind of navigating the US China tensions at the moment.
Okay, I'll be very, in a way, very, say, local on my first reaction to that. There's a say in Brazil about one state in Brazil, which is an important state, which is Minas Gerais is where it always has been.
Yeah.
So in a way, Brazil is where it has always been. I mean, the world has changed, and we continue to believe in the same thing.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It's exactly say, well, when there was the Cold War, it said, okay, guys, fine, we understand the different things, but we don't have to take total sides.
Yep.
We may have more affinity with one thing than with others, but we are not taking sides. It's not really our fight, and you have contributions for everybody. So then, I mean, there was no, Cold War anymore, and nobody paid attention to this position. Now maybe there is a little bit more of a polarity, and you continue to say the same thing. You know, guys, everybody has its own way of conducting things, and they have their own interests, and that's fine. But we can deal with everybody, and especially when you relate to trade. And we believe that, look, we have our own preference. Democracy in the more traditional way is the way we structure our country, okay? Separation of powers, but with harmony, elections, freedom of speech, all of these. That's the way we live, we believe, and so on. But it doesn't mean that you cannot talk, we cannot trade. People have some sort of different approach to that. Even when countries change also their own approach to that, okay, we will continue to be friends and you continue to do things. So I believe that's really the point. Now, why? So this is the non-alignment. Now, the active maybe is that there are many important things, common challenges that Brazil likes to contribute to. Okay, so climate. We have the responsibility of the COP this year. Okay, we will be active on trying to push this agenda. Poverty. Brazil is a country with poverty, we experience poverty, we even experience hunger. So, particularly this present, but the country is really very sympathetic to any work that is related to that, which I mean, development, global development. We got just the Nobel Prize about the development, right? So this is where we want to be active in this kind of agenda, even on health in some cases. So that's the way I see the active non-alignment. We always have been non-aligned. We have sometimes when it's really necessary, or if you are in any way, say, hurt, we may take sides. I mean, an example that is very often is during World War II. Brazil was neutral and not supporting either country. There is some expectation from the U.S. We could get a few things before U.S. entered in the war, and then after the U.S. entered in the war, for whatever reason, the Axis decided to sink a few of ships and have other accidents. Then we took sides of the U.S. and we really helped with our small contribution, but you help the Allied effort for the liberation of Europe. And we had a lot of Europeans that had moved to Brazil, so we also sent, particularly Italy. So that's really our tradition.
Autonomous until under attack.
Autonomous under attack, but active, like you said, on the good causes, on things that are close to our heart and where we believe we can contribute.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned. So you mentioned active agenda. So obviously you mentioned COP this year. Brazil had G20, was it last year, G20 presidency, and also has the BRICS presidency this year.
Yes.
So, tell me a little bit about kind of how Brazil has used those different policy platforms, those different global multilateral platforms, to advance some of its agenda. And how does Brazil view the BRICS coalition? It's been expanded now as of last year, and kind of how is it using its presidency this year in terms of agenda setting for the BRICS?
Okay, let's start with COP.
Yeah.
COP, we think that is a time of implementation. A lot has been negotiated, there are problems and so on. So let's see what we can make happen. And this has to do with, say, the funds to support tropical forests. Tropical forests are essential to the world. You have to find ways to protect not only Brazil, but to think about Central Africa, think about Indonesia, other areas that have tropical forests. So we are trying to have this tropical forest front forever, which is a clever idea. Actually, we have developed this even at nighttime at the World Bank.
Yeah.
And it seems that there is interest from a number of countries. We also trying to develop nature-based solutions that help to address climate change. And in some cases, even if you can think about biofuel that you mentioned before, they are affordable ways to reduce emissions. And it's very important, even rich nations look at the affordable ways to get to address climate, because if they are not affordable these days, it's very difficult to make them happen, right? But if it's something that can be cheaper and solid and bring the results. And in addition to that, you help development, you help protect things that if you are not protecting, it'd be very difficult to say put them back again, like forests.
Yeah.
So these are the main agendas of Brazil for COP. Implementation, with some discussions also about financing, which is actually part of the paper we wrote 2 years ago here at Bretton. The G20 is kind of a passage de baston, and the baton with some focus on, again, hunger and the development. And I think the sequence of India, Brazil, South Africa has been very positive.
Yes.
I think these you give a lot of good things for the U.S. to work next year. But we know the important thing about the G20 is that it continues to run. It's a great place for conversation and get some things in a formal way to help them and to happen. In the
Get
case
political buy-in, right?
Yeah. In the case of South Africa, I should mention related to climate, the effort they're making to bring a more transparency and more say homogeneity to carbon credits. So they have a sort of a framework that has been discussed, and I think this would help to develop a global market for carbon credit. This is one specific thing that they're doing that shows this continuation. Now, BRICS. BRICS is a different game because BRICS is not really a treaty. We don't make very strong decisions, but it's really a place where countries can get together, can discuss, and mind you, sometimes you think that if you have a coalition, it has to be against something. No, it can be just in favor of some general thoughts. Now, there's a lot of diversity in the BRICS, right? So again, you have to look at the common ground, which is development, which is in a way climate, and see what you can do together. Now we have widened the constituency of BRICS, which I think brings also new angles, new visions to it. So it's mostly, I believe, a place where you can build some sort of consensus, sometimes on narrow topics, and move together on that. We have a bank, which is a relatively small development bank. It has been working, is increasing. There are some challenges because some of the shareholders, of course, are in a special situation these days, but it's operating, and I think responds some of the demands of the group. So I believe that it's very non-controversial. The BRICS is one more voice, and even some things that people might think, oh, but what it means when you talk, for example, at the break, people talk about, say, trade in a domestic currency without having to resort to a third currency and so on and so forth. Well, this may appear very controversial, but this is exactly what the BIS is doing, right? And we had some discussions about that because the technology now allows so many things, so many simplifications. I mean, a few weeks ago, SWIFT has adopted some of the things with tokenization and so on and so forth, which, I mean, you mentioned when I was at the World Bank, this is what, 2017, right? What we're discussing that time, this is the beginning of the things. We say, well, for cross-border transactions, that's fantastic. We spend a lot of time discussing for remittances, which now is a reality, not only in countries that have complicated situation, but it lowered the cost of remittances quite a lot. So this is new reality. You can call it a stable coin, you can call it whatever, but it's obvious that we're going to have more choice in the way you do, you send money, you pay for goods, you pay for services, and there is no hostility into that.
And if the outcome is to make it cheaper, more efficient,
accessible to everybody, and so on. And then, of course, there are some hard realities, right? Some currencies are stronger than others, and some. You see, now it's 15 years since the time of Governor Meirelles in Brazil. We have some sort of agreement with Argentina that you allow banks to do netting. So, of course, if you have an imbalance, it's more difficult to so in any case, you have to compare the reality on the ground. But technology allows a lot of wonderful new things that you make life easier and you reduce costs for everybody.
Something else that we were working on when you were at the World Bank, I remember, that's now coming into fruition a bit is I remember we had many conversations, Bretton Woods Committee and World Bank, about infrastructure as an asset class. And there's actually been some movement now with the World Bank and the Private Sector Investment Lab towards securitization and towards more standards to mobilize financing at scale. I don't know if you've been following closely any of the private sector work with the World Bank, and if you have any thoughts on, now finally seeing some movement, I think, in my opinion, on some of the private sector mobilization, which, I mean, you started a lot of these initiatives when you were there, but, 10 years or longer to get some of these things into implementation. We got to move faster, right?
Yeah, well, look, again, there are realities on the ground
Yeah.
that you have to address, right? I mean, risk you can shift around and so on, but you cannot eliminate. So someone has to hold the bag at the end. And of course, you can find clever ways to increase the transparency, to reduce the perception of risk and many things. And in some cases, through reforms, even reduce the risks. So one thing that has continued to increase is, for instance, the question of platforms. And yeah, I have to say two things regard to Brazil because it inform my views too. One, in Brazil, most of the infrastructure nowadays is private. Okay, and more what you have is concessions of roads, everything. I mean, airports, roads, ports, gas, electricity, telecom. We still have a public mail, but with a lot of private
Yeah.
companies also providing parcels and so on and so forth. So this is one thing. The other is, I mean, the transparency is very important. For instance, we have related to climate, but we have done with Bloomberg and GFANS and so on, a big platform with all the projects that are worthwhile to invest, to look and so on. This is curated by BNDES and it had been quite interesting. You don't have miracles, but you have things moving. So you talk hydrogen, you talk reforestation, a number of things, and some of them with components of infrastructure. So I believe that the more and more you have alignment of the multilaterals is important. There's so much they can do. There's the issue which we also used to discuss, which is the prudential regulation.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't realize that, for instance, the green infrastructure actually has a better return or is steadier than standard infrastructure. And in some cases, we could argue that the capital charges for infrastructure in some countries is very high.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see the progress. I think that more and more this is also tied with the climate thing. We Professor Bhattacharya and Nick Stern and so on. They're doing a great job discussing this, and it's interesting because most of what is discussed there is how you can do an investment that you need anyway, but you do it in the right way. And actually, if you do it looking longer and thinking about sustainability, usually these you have lower risk than you just do something that, well, it may appear a little bit cheaper in the short run. And these, I think, can help the progress in infrastructure. Let me finish with one thing in this respect, which is an evolution of something that already existed at that time. Actually, comes 15 years ago with Mark Carney. This idea of what was at the time was called the stranded assets. Then we had the a Bloomberg report, which is basically to have companies making disclosures, okay, about their carbon footprint, their potential trajectory, and how they're going to really make this trajectory happen, which is a capital allocation that they're going to do. This has become some accounting standards, right? The ISSB, the sustainable standard, IRFS 1 and 2. Okay, unfortunately, most countries have not made that mandatory. Brazil is likely to implement these by 27. Is in the books. There is the regulation points to that. And I think this is very important. And this would help dramatically all this question of financing, including developing world. Why? Because when companies will have to disclose where they're going to do and how they're going to do, the question about affordability will be very important. And these will help a lot of companies having a different look of, for instance, oh, I need the energy. Where are going to get the energy? Oh, it just happens that a lot of developing countries are good sources of energy, sustainable energy, and things like these. So if you could have the implementation of ISSB, these standards, and have real disclosures in accounting terms for companies, the big companies in the world, okay, they're not forced to do anything, right? They just have to show where they are, what they plan, and how they plan to get there, and the capital allocations that are involved. I think this could have a tremendous impact on the choices by investors, by companies, and I think because there are clear comparative advantages in many developing countries, you could have some capital moving there. And usually the experience even 15 years ago is that, for instance, you're going to do energy production in a country. Even if most of it is for export, a lot will stay there. So it's a way to anchor a project in a developing country that if you're just looking domestic market, much more difficult to mobilize. There's so much of guarantees that the World Bank could do. So I'd say, and this is again is something that you put in that report, introducing that at the level of surveillance by IMF, but also in terms of discussions and the general push of the World Bank would help a lot to achieve the goals that we all want to see really happening and getting to every country. Yeah. Well, a lot has changed in 2 years since we wrote that report. How do you, I mean, some of these recommendations and some of the goals on climate, for example, under the Brazilian COP presidency, I mean, how do you see those progressing in this, kind of global environment where it just seems like the climate agenda has taken a little bit of a back seat in the last couple of years? Look, I don't have the full picture. I hear very often that, look, companies know what's going on. They may not brag about these things for any reason, but when they make their decisions, they factor in because the reality, right? I mean, we see we see two things. First, you see the extreme weather events and so on happening, and second, the technology continues to move. So, I mean, I sometimes, interestingly enough, AI will create a problem because it increases the demand for it. But at the same time, it will also create new ways of doing things. Some of them which will reduce energy consumption, and others that I think will help us even to get to new sources of of energy. So, for instance, people have realized that AI is of great help, for instance, to make, how fusion energy is produced. I mean, they have the plasma, which is a very hot thing with ionic and so on. It's there where you get the hydrogen getting together and so on. That's beautiful, but very hard to control. And with the usual old time algorithms and so on, it was pretty much impossible. You might get 1 millisecond and then the whole thing will fall apart. Now we're seeing a lot of progress using AI, okay, and all sorts of neural network and so on to be able to respond much quicker to any changes in that. So these are electromagnetic fields that you have to control. I mean, really hard science. And look, just a few miles from here, less than 100 miles from here, there are people who are investing big money, private sector, together with universities, and they have the hope. Sometimes it's, well, it'll be in 26, 27, but if it's 2030, who cares? Okay, so there are new things happening, and companies are aware of that, and they are incorporating these things. Of course, you cannot take the risk. Oh, in 5 years they're going to have all the energy I need, so now let's burn everything we have. It's not like this, but it means that the issue has not disappeared. The way to address it may have changed somewhat, but people are very conscious of its its importance.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even in the U.S., look, the dislocation, displacement of coal by natural gas has reduced emissions in the U.S.
Yeah.
quite dramatically. And as long as you don't have fugitive emissions from natural gas, we are making real progress on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask a few more questions and then we'll wrap up. One is we're talking a lot about the World Bank and some of the multilateral, global multilateral convenings. We're here at IMF World Bank Meetings Week. So I want to ask you sort of what are you watching for this week? What are you expecting to happen at IMF World Bank annual meetings this week?
Look, of course, from the IMF, some sort of discussion and pulse taking of the macro.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not going to say something absolutely revolutionary or new, but we have not seen really the consequences of all these changes in
Yeah.
policies, right?
Not yet.
So it may happen, may not happen. Maybe they don't happen because they will not happen anyway, or they may not happen because there is AI that is changing everything.
Yeah.
Or maybe they happen and there will be a cost, and we may have a slow patch next year. So I think that from IMF, in terms of global economy, this is very important. I think the IMF will be happy that although there is some rearrangement in terms of tariffs and so on, most countries decided not to increase tariffs,
Mm-hmm.
okay, including Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
There's some discussion, reciprocal tariffs. It's not worth
Yeah.
doing, okay? And this, of course, reduces drastically the risk of a global slowdown,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think this will be the main thing. If there is still old timers in the IMF, I hope to see something about fiscal.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and how you address risk and you see, I mean, bond markets.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at CDS of different countries; they go up and down, and so on.
Yeah.
Um, so from the World Bank, I hear that they have a new realignment
That's right.
with
Yeah.
IFC, and there's new roles for MIGA, blah blah. So
Yeah.
I think these will occupy a lot of the time,
Yep.
and what to expect from this. And I think there'll be a lot of interest in both cases, and it'll be a really good opportunity for people to set their mind for the next year.
Yeah, well, I think we're all going to be waiting to hear on both of those what the IMF thinks about the global economy outlook. Yeah, some of the impacts haven't quite shown up yet. Are they going to? Are we going to innovate our way out of a potential slowdown? And then, as you said, on the bank side, I think absolutely. What does this restructuring really look like, and what is that
What
going
will be the
to do?
goals now and so on?
Yeah. And can it really help mobilize finance at scale?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think yes,
Which
they
is
get
the goal.
together.
Yeah.
There are a few tricky things, but and it'll be interesting to see how they address it because, as you know, IBRD lends to government.
Yeah.
Okay, IFC to companies.
Yeah.
How you
Have those balance sheets. Yeah.
how you mix that so
Yeah.
that you get huge projects, but you'll be private projects, you'll be public projects.
Yeah.
Let's see
Yeah.
how this moves.
And maintain the coveted AAA credit rating. Right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, which I think will be a big
Yeah.
question. Okay, last thing I want to ask you. I can't let you go without asking you about Brazilian elections next year. What is the current kind of political landscape in Brazil? What are you expecting for elections? What's the political
Look,
discourse
I
like?
mean, first, it'll be one more election. So every election, you have the possibility of alternance or not. It will depend on a number of factors. We don't know who the candidates will be.
Mm-hmm.
There's a presumption that the president will run again,
Mm-hmm.
but he himself has not been
Not yet said.
totally sure about that. And then there are a number of interesting possible candidates from the opposition, but still no clue of who could be. Okay, and also what would be the main platforms? I think that everybody wants to see Brazil focusing on a few things. If you want more investment, probably you need a little bit more of savings. You don't have to have 30% of GDP of savings. But if you had some ways to go gross savings to say 23%, I think this would help a lot. What you need for that. Of course, social programs in Brazil are very important.
Yep.
There are things that you can do a little bit different, not. You can moderate a few things. There's also a discussion, it's a little bit more technical, but has political consequences, and it'll be interesting to see both sides. Brazil has a tremendous advantage in all sorts of, say, sustainable energy, and this could help us to attract investment and so on and so forth. But this requires some changes, okay? From, say, maybe promoting hybrid cars to see in the electric sector, there are a few things that you have to change to ensure the reliability of the network and so on without a huge cost or huge emissions. So there is this combination of big visions with some guidance to the business sector. Not only on fiscal, I hope that the discussion is not fiscal, because it's not enough.
Yeah.
And from there, I think we're going to have a good discussion. I think the time of pure polarization, it's gone. People are tired with that. Of course, sometimes it's easier. You just say something, the other say something, and but this is not very, very productive. And people are they want to see things that will bring a result, benefits, and in a transparent way, not just promises and promises. So I think, elections for the last 2,500 years had been a source of good things, sometimes also a sort of a short run focus. But I think on the whole could be a very fruitful period for Brazil. And I don't see any reason to have say, uncertainty or problems with the economy during this period.
Yeah.
Some people might prefer one side than the other. Markets may move. It's totally normal. We saw here in the U.S. between September and November last year how much the dollar, the interest rate, everything moving before and after the election, and then settled down.
After Liberation Day?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So some market movement, it's okay, but I don't think that would be at any level that would create instability or anything like this.
Yeah. Well, I want to end on your note of optimism that the period of extreme polarization is over in Brazil. I hope that's the case, and I hope that's the case here in the US going forward in our election cycle as well. Thank you very much, Joaquim, for coming today. We covered a lot of ground. No one better to discuss all things Brazil. You gave us a really great insight into both the economy and the politics, and also where it fits in on the global stage. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All
Great
right.
pleasure.